to the episode 2 of Rebecca Western of the Soldier. Today we are going to do the competition between Margaret and Kitty. Can't even be made. Now, let's dive right in. Now we can clearly see a class distinction between Margaret Allington and Kitty. Margaret, the former girlfriend of Chris, versus Kitty, the present wife. Let us start. The competition between Margaret and Kitty is unequal in so many ways. To Kitty and Jenny, Margaret's class represents a crisis and a terrible disruption to the life of Baldry-Court. Now, Baldry-Court defined many things. Richness, while Margaret could be said a life of working woman. Jenny's first description of Margaret fixates on her cheap clothes, the red-eyed feather on her hat, red-seamed hands, as she says in the book, with a particularly feminine antagonism. She is described as something dirty, repulsively soiled with poverty and neglect, likened to a forgotten glove in a hotel room. Worse is what Margaret says to Kitty by way of an introduction. My general sister to your second housemate. Margaret has a maid. Kitty has numerous. Margaret is not working class but lower middle class. Like the clerk Leonard Bast in Howard's End, it is Margaret's social proximity that renders her repellent and dangerous, not her distance. Initially, Kitty refuses to believe that Margaret could even know Chris, accusing her of extortion. Jenny is kinder and unwillingly senses Margaret is telling the truth. Nevertheless, Jenny quickly rewrites honesty from the standpoint of pity, likening Margaret to a clumsy animal, a draught ox or a big trusted dog. Now let me highlight these portions for you so that you know which are important. Now, whenever a question shall come on this portion, you must put these words. I shall underline the words for you. Alright, you get the point. I think the whole portion got highlighted though. Alright, let's move on. So, if we are trying to talk about Margaret, what do we say? That we can use the words such as clumsy animal, which is used in the book itself. Kitty calls Margaret a clumsy animal. Jenny quickly writes and calls Margaret a clumsy animal, a draught ox or a big trusted dog. Now coming to the differences firstly between Jenny and Kitty's understanding of Margaret, which is central to the novel as the novel progresses, and the question of who Margaret really is comes to the fore. When Kitty and Jenny allow Margaret their lives for the sake of Chris, because what else can they do? Chris, husband of Kitty and brother of Jenny, they can do nothing but help him. He is in shell shock, post-traumatic stress disorder nowadays that we call it. Her social danger multiplies. Jenny must visit Margaret's house, Mariposa, in a town of people who could not do as they like, too close to the railway line and with a sofa upholstered in a sickish green velveteen. Margaret greets her with the disordered hair and flurry hands. The novel is obsessed with hands and Margaret's red-seamed ones in particular. I will come in episode 3 about how red can be used as a symbol in this novel. Or if the question on symbolism comes, how you can use this color. In contrast, Baldry-Court, redesigned by Kitty at enormous expense, is full of shining, shallow luxury and nearly invisible labor. But whilst one part of Jenny's narration focuses on the all-too-palpable social world, a second strand, consciously, sometimes awkwardly, symbolic, introduces another world or dimension. Associated first with Jenny's anxious dreams about Chris in no man's land and her childhood memories, Jenny's Chris was imaginative boy who believed that the birch tree would really stir and shrink and quicken into an enchanted princess, right? That was cross the line. Now let's move on. Much later, Jenny had a vision of the front as a literal hell in which Chris must choose between the two crystal balls he's offered by a malevolent shopkeeper, one which contains Jenny and Kitty and the other Margaret. This is really important. Let me explain it to you again. Jenny has a vision of the front, right, as a literal hell in which Chris Baldry must choose between two crystal balls. Think of it like choosing between two sides. Think of it as a reference, like let's say you're watching a movie, that one popular movie that came out in 2001. What was it? Keanu Reeves movie, right? Comment section, just write which movie I'm talking about, right? If you know what I mean. Much later, Jenny has this vision, right, where Chris has to choose between the red pill and the blue pill. Here, Kitty and Margaret. Now, the hell dreamed by Jenny has an alternative, though which is different from both Baldry Court and Mariposa. Now, coming to the character of Chris Baldry, he has already forgotten everything about Jenny. Margaret, all that he remembers is Margaret Allington. His life with Margaret in Monkey Island, their trip to the boat, and how Margaret got upset with what Chris said during the boat ride. This is all he remembers, and all he can think of is Margaret Allington. That is exactly why he says, after the first furious night in Baldry Court, "I must see her, or else I will die," he says. Now this hell dreamt by Jenny has an alternative, which is different from both Baldry Court and Mariposa. This place is Monkey Island, where Chris and Margaret fell in love. Here I use the picture of 1940 edition of The Return of the Soldier. As you can see from the boat ride picture, it means a lot, doesn't it? Comment below if you know what it means. Now let's come to the book about two long passages from Chris and Margaret's points of view, which look back to the past together before they meet in the present. Monkey Island is a real place near Bray and the rural waterbound inn. Its garden fringed by chestnuts and walnuts. Can you also notify the fact that, can you also notice the fact that here, she makes such well use of, a lot of imagery. Waterbound, as you can see. She mentions chestnuts and walnuts. The garden fringed by chestnuts and walnuts is where Margaret and her father live and work. Prosaically, Margaret is the innkeeper's daughter, but in Chris's account, she is the spirit of a secret pastoral. This can be said as a pastoral imagery, which you can use a reference of Wordsworth if you want to. Now, while Margaret's father chases after his beloved ducks and rabbits, and Margaret prepares tea, a romantic evening settles, transforming everything and everyone in it. Later in the moonlight, Margaret becomes a goddess when she is lifted by Chris into one of those niches of a Greek-style temple. By its light, he could not tell if her hair was white or silver or yellow or gold. His love was changeless, and nothing changes when he sees her again. In Chris's eyes, Margaret isn't a publican's daughter or a married woman with cheap, clicking stays and red hands. She is the woman he loves in the ageless and the classless essence of nurturing feminine. Later on, Margaret seems to acquire the powers of the medium when she seems to be able to conjure the very character of Chris's dead son by touching the little boy's things. The novel story is as much about Jenny's learning to see Margaret in these same hallowed terms as it is observed about the struggle of Chris. Now let's come to this letter from the Observer from June 1928, which is, responding to this negative review of this stage adaptation of the story. Rebecca West wrote this. The idea of the story came from two sources. It happened that in 1914 she heard of this cases of amnesia which war had produced. This reminded her of a paper that she had read in a medical journal before the war, in which a factory doctor had recorded without comment the case of an elderly factory hand, which fell down a staircase on his head and came to himself on a delusion that he was a boy of 20. And then it later gave a great pain to his wife by repudiating and demanding a sweetheart from whom he had been separated for many years. Can you imagine the wife's condition? At a much more level, you could also expect a question of the psychological side of the wife, right? You could prepare it and bring in your answer. Coming to the next point that I'm trying to make here, we've already discussed a lot of points, but let's break it down in the end. But right now, let's come to what she wrote in this letter. This is a very important part that you must know, because it's something that the author has written herself, right? Later, she found out from the character model for Margaret, and the whole story slipped into a wartime. West translated the story she read about the old factory hand which fell down the stairs into an upper middle class setting. Probably not surprising, but the war, rather than a fall down the stairs, and Chris's relative youth steer West's narrative away from the comic possibility. The phrase slipped into wartime suggests both inevitability and chance, and this seems congruent with the peculiar status the war has in the novel. On the one hand, there is a familiar juxtaposition between England and the front. Look at this picture here. It's by Winifred Nice, Cliffs at Beer, Devon. It's an oil on canvas. Made in 1922. I'll tell you about this painting later on. Now, here, England is represented as the land itself, right? And a feminine that must be protected at all costs. John Buchan's South African hero James Hannay first gets England in Mr. Steadfast, the movie, 1919, when he spends a charmed afternoon in Cotswold, having met the woman working as a nurse, whom he will later marry. Baldry Hall, with its horses and dogs, seemed to be an emblem of the England that makes the war worth fighting. Now, coming here, you could say that if there is a question on the description of the places in the novel, you must mention about first Monkey Island, right? Second comes Baldry Hall. Life in both these places are much different. You must mention the distinction between these two places. Baldry Hall, with its horses and dogs, seemed to be an emblem of the England that makes the war worth fighting. It is certainly is for Kitty and Jenny at the start of the novel, but not, it seems, for Chris. By refusing to remember, by aligning with the Margaret of the Monkey Island, he is also refusing to fight. Now, the wartime horizon also means that this isn't just Chris's story, but the story of any man who returns from the horrors of the front and finds home, right? Now, let's come again to the first part where Jenny and the wife Kitty receive the letter from Margaret. Margaret's letter, which we will discuss in the third episode, also means a lot, which you have to use in your answer. For now, let's focus on the relationship again. Now, it is certainly that it is for Kitty and Jenny at the start of the novel, but not, it seems, that he is also refusing to fight. Now, this fact that the wartime horizon means that this isn't just Chris's story, right? It could mean any man's story. Any man could have had PTSD after they had to see war. Imagine, this is the time of World War I. The people were sent to war even without the knowledge of war. We will come and discuss war poetry in the next episode series, and you will get to know the effects of war and how it has on the soldier. During World War I, during the war, people thought, and it is still thought right now in the present scenario as well. This is very relevant even now. Years have passed. It was 1922. 2022 has already happened. That means 100 years, a decade earlier, right? A decade has happened, but nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Now, this is all I had to say for episode 2. We'll see each other in episode 3 again. Till then, keep studying, keep learning, and never forget, literature is a lot interesting than you really think, right? Goodbye. Good night.